Hi everyone, this is part 2 of our Cupig class. I'm sorry that this video was having such trouble with the sound and it kept starting and stopping. You'll actually have this video recorded in 4 segments. This is a repeat of the second segment because we didn't have all the information actually showed on the camera. So I'm going to show you once again how to do this toga, and we'll take care of it from there. First thing I wanted to talk about is the kind of brushes that I like to use for my stippling and dry brushing. I like to use a kind of brush that is round, fairly full, and is domed on the top all the way around. If you look at it from the side angle, you can see that it's curved this way. And I like that because as I apply my stippling or dry brushing and I hit against the flat surface, not all of the bristles are hitting at the same time. Now, I have done a lot of stenciling and a lot of stippling with your regular flat cut type of stencil brush, and you can get a really airy and light looking effect with these if your brush is very, very dry with paint. However, it is so much easier with this type of brush. I like these kinds of bristles. They have a nice spring to them, but they're fairly resistant. They're quite dense. And you can get a really nice effect with these. Another kind of dry brush that I love and use all the time are these kind of brushes. This is the kind that I fell in love with originally. It's called a crescent brush made by Low Cornell. Low Cornell does not make many brushes anymore, and they do not make these anymore. If you see these anywhere, sold by anyone on the internet, snatch them up because they're awesome. But again, I'm in love with the dome-shaped tip, and they're also, even though they're narrow, also, I can turn it, are domed in this direction. And for this, all the same reasons that I like this being domed, meaning not all the bristles hitting at the same time, I also love these. Now here's some alternates, since Low Cornell doesn't make these anymore. Artist Club, and they're not alive anymore, also made these. They call their highlighter brush, but if you have any of these that you bought and didn't quite know what to do with them, listen up because we're going to give you some good instruction. They're pretty much the same as these, except Low Cornell has a few more bristles in them. This one is currently made. It's a Mezzaluna brush. It's made by Dynasty, and you can see that it's the same shape. The bristles are a different color and slightly different texture, but you can get the same effect with that. So those are the kinds of things that we'll be using today, and we'll be talking about those maybe a little bit more as we go along in the lesson. Okay, the first color that we're going to start out with, and we're going to do a dry brush and then a stippling and a dry brush technique, because we're going to use bubblegum pink. So I want you to go ahead and get a little bit out on your palette, and I need a palette paper to pounce on, which I forgot to get. So I'll just pull one out here. I usually do this on typing paper. I like to use cardstock. Any kind of paper will really do. And I also use a very dry paper towel. So the combination of those two things worked really well to take out some of the paint initially from the brush when we load it in. This is a little bit wrinkly. I usually start with a more flat sheet of paper. We'll try this. So what you want to do is you want to dip your brush into the paint, but I don't have a lot loaded on there. I just look at the end of the brush. The whole brush is not covered with paint. I just have maybe half the size of a dime. I'm going to take this to my palette paper, and I'll eventually move it over to my paper towel. And I'm going to start bouncing this all around. Now, I'm not totally smashing really hard. It's kind of a light pounce. But as you can see, the more I move the brush around, the more I'm able to get some of that paint off and see a combination of paint and the background of the paper. And that's exactly what I want. I don't want the paper to be covered completely solid with paint. Now, when it starts to look a little dry, I like to take it over to a dry paper towel because it's got a little more texture in it, and I like to pounce it and start a dry rub. Now, what you want, how you know when your brush is ready to be used, is when you start doing a swirling technique, you can see some of the background color underneath. So this is ready to go. This is ready to start dry brushing. This might be still a little bit dark. So when your brush gets like that, you're ready to go. Now, the first time that you load a dry brush, by the way, these brushes should always be used dry in this technique. You probably want to load it again because you don't have a whole lot of paint in here and it hasn't really dispersed much up towards the ferrule at all. You really don't want to paint up in the ferrule, you'll have way too much. So I like to do this process again for the second time when you use the brush. And then after like a third or fourth time you load paint in, it starts to get enough paint in there that you can really do something with. So now as I am lightly pouncing around, you can see it leaves a slightly bigger spot than it did before. And then because the paint is getting a little more diffused, I have a little more area of my brush that has paint in it. Okay, so I'm getting a soft look. I'm getting a look where I can see some of the white background in between. And we're going to take it over to our toga. And we're going to just start pouncing with the stippling effect. And we're just going to go all over the entire toga. And I usually go about within a ½ inch from the edge. And I'm starting it with a light pressure. You need to kind of relax your shoulders a little bit and kind of ease into the technique. You can move as fast or as slow as you want. I'm trying to get it as even of a coverage as I can, but it's not going to be completely perfect. That's okay. We're going to go over it again. We're going to put other layers on it. This will turn out just fine. What you want to do is just create some texture on this background, so it's just not a plain color. Now, as I work my way up along here, and I started out over here, notice I haven't reloaded my brush yet. I'm still using the same amount of paint that I had in my brush, but I'm getting less and less and less because we're applying that paint and my brush is getting more and more dry. I still have one spot of color in here that is kind of leaving a mark, but now I'm getting to the point where it feels like there's nothing left in there. Well, there actually is quite a bit left in there, and I'll show you what I mean. Now we're going to do what I call dry rubbing. So with this brush that looked like it was empty, if I take it to a white piece of paper or a paper towel where you can see it and just start scrubbing in a circular fashion, there really is some paint left in there and it's very soft. And this is how you can get a really airy and really super, super soft texture and look to your paintings by using a lot of this super dry rubbing. Now I want to, when I'm done moving around here and get my hand out of the way, I'm going to lift this up and you'll be able to see very clearly on the camera the difference between the area that I dry rubbed and how soft it looks as opposed to that which is just plain stippled. So very, very effective technique, very forgiving technique. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, so it really is time to reload my brush again. It really is dry. Pounce out the bulk of it on a piece of paper or your palette paper and move it over to your paper towel and then do some little scruffy rubs on it until it starts to feel really light. Then come back over to your toga and use a super light pressure. The more paint you have in here, the more light of a pressure you'll want to use with your pouncing. And then as the brush starts to get dry, you can increase that pressure to get more paint out. So I am just, again, very, very light pressure. And by now, I've loaded my brush about 3 or 4 times. When I first started over here, I'd only loaded it twice in the paint. But now that I've loaded it 3 or 4 times, it goes a bit further because now some of that paint is starting to push up into the ferrule. And We're just going along here, trying to get our coverage as even as possible, but not worrying a whole bunch if it looks slightly splotchy. Now, you've got to remember, we're going to be dry brushing over here, and we're going to be adding other layers of color, several layers of color, light and dark. So you can't really mess this up too much. In fact, when we get some of our other colors on here, some of this, which looks a little intense right now, such a dark and such a light, will really quite fade into the background. It will really become indiscernible. Okay, my brush is almost getting to the point where I'm ready to dry rub again. It's pretty dry. So I'm going to go back to some of these areas where I had not dry rubbed before. I'm going to start with the light pressure and start that swirling action again. And let's get some of that area filled in. Now, the more paint you have in your brush, the more times you dipped it in and pounced it out, you're going to have more paint. So you want to make sure when you start this dry rubbing process that your pressure is light. If you start with a light pressure and you're not getting enough color laid down, then increase your pressure and you'll see some more things happen. But you can always add more paint on top, but it's very difficult to remove paint without painting the whole thing over from scratch. Nobody wants to do that. So start light, add to it rather than try to take away after having too much. Okay, so you can tell the difference. This has some dry rubbing on it. This has even more, and look how much smoother it looks. Okay, I've got the whole area stippled, so now I don't really need to stipple anymore. Now I just need to get to that dry rub stage. So I am going to take a lot of the paint out here, and I'm going to take even more paint out here on my paper towel, and I'm going to be super careful because now we've got quite a bit of paint in it. And when I start my dry rub over here, I'm going to keep the bristles up high. I'm going to keep the pressure light. And I'm just scrubbing around here, filling in some of these areas that look a little dark. Now, this area of the toga appears to be darker than this area, which it is a little bit. So I'm going to add a little more color over here in just a minute, but not until I get this area smoothed out in a way that I like it. So I will keep scrubbing along here. I'm going to shift the angle of it. Now, once you kind of get the area swirled in, it's okay if you're positive that your brush is really dry to do some long scrubbing with your brush and kind of blend those areas together. And just get that area all soft and smooth looking. Okay, we need to get some more color in down here because this end of the toga is lighter than this color. So back to my pouncing again. I still think I'm going to see if I can achieve it by a little more dry rubbing, but it's got to be pretty light. Now, here's an area where I had almost too much paint to start the dry rubbing because it shows a little bit. That's going to be okay. I'm going to kind of pounce that out, kind of stipple over it just a little bit to blend it in. In fact, I've still got enough here and there. I really do need to kind of stipple more of it out. The only way you can really know for absolute sure is just to try it. And if the dry rub has any streaks in it at all, as you start to do that swirl thing, you've got too much paint in there and it needs to be dried out some. And by the way, that's looking more even now all the way across. Now I've taken quite a bit more of that paint out, so now I'm going to try my dry rubbing again, and that's exactly how I want it to be. That's better. That's not too streaky. And getting some of our areas softened and filled in. And going in a lengthwise kind of stroke to kind of get that area all looking like one. There you go. Now on the camera, it looks a little more kind of speckly and splotchy than what it does to me here, but Even so, I really like the looks of that. I'm actually pointing at my camera with my brush. I think it looks great, actually. So there you go with that. Now, I've got that the way I want. So now, if you look at our toga, I'm going to hold this picture up here. You'll see that the toga kind of, let me hold it a little closer, is like fabric that's been folded over, and it kind of has this big crease that goes all the way along here. And it has some kind of partial creases along here, and some little parts on the side where it kind of dips in and out. That's because if you ever look at your clothing, you know, the fabric in your clothing, none of your clothing actually hangs totally straight without any shadows or anything in it. So we're going to put some highlights in here, right along here, right along here, to make our fabric look like it's bending out and bending out. So it'll look a little strange on here when we do it, but it'll look good when we're done, and it'll give the illusion that that toga is just draped across the piggy's body. So hopefully you can see in your lines where those two areas are separated by that crease. And we're going to go in this area again and this area again with the same color. I might need a little bit more here on my palette of bubblegum. Here it is. And we'll just do the same thing. We're going to dry brush, stipple, and then dry brush to brighten it. But we're not going to go all over the whole toga. We'll just go in those areas to make those brighter. Now I've got a lot more paint in here than when I first started with my loading my brush, so I want to be very careful that I'm not going to leave splotches or splots. So I've taken quite a bit out there, but even so, look at that. You can see how much more paint. So I'm going to lighten up my pressure a little bit and pull back how hard I'm pouncing. I'm going to go right down the middle of the center of this first fold, or the bottom fold of the fabric. And it does look like a stripe right now, but we will blend that in so it will look a little more appealing to the eye. All the way down this middle part right here, kind of move it back and forth. If you feel like your brush tends to make a pattern as you stipple, you can move your brush around, twist it and turn it a little bit so that it takes up different area. I've still got a ton of paint on here. I think I've got too much on here still to dry brush, so I will stipple some more up here in this other fold. I'm going to chase that stripe for that fold of the fabric, that brighter part, all the way down. Get it towards the end. I've still got quite a bit of paint in here. More than you'd ever guess just by looking at it. You can tell by how bright it is. Let's get that all the way in there. And, you know, maybe this crease could be about 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch wide. It's not totally right or wrong here because we are going to be shading over it and putting other highlights on it, so it will look okay if it's not exactly the same size. Okay, I just need a tiny bit more, not a whole bunch. Not a whole bunch. For the end of this row up here. And I just got that kind of brightened all the way along. Now, because I know that I've still got quite a bit of paint in these bristles, I'm going to dry rub again like this, but I'm going to do it pretty soft. I just want to go over the middle part softly. Soften that in a little bit. Kind of make that not look quite so dramatic and harsh, but blend that gently in. So that really does look like a brighter stripe, and that's kind of exactly what we want. Normally I would tell you to leave a stripe of color like that, on anything that's flat, really, but since this is resembling folded fabric, that's going to be okay. So just scrub in a tiny bit of that color. Soften that up a little bit, and just a tiny more. Really dry here. Really, really, really dry there. And I'm just going to soften that in a little bit by a dry rub. There we go. So you be the judge of how intense you want that. We're going to put a lighter color in here in just a minute, so it will look even more different. Okay, so you can see we've got our highlights right along here. Okay, so we're going to set aside that bubblegum pink. And the next color that we're going to go to is baby pink, which is just a step up. As you know, we use baby pink in here. Actually, before you start with the baby pink, I want you to take some of this bubble gum, and we're going to go to our wings. And I want you to just dry brush and stipple a little bit around the top parts of our wings. I don't have a whole lot of paint in here because I almost have it gone from my palette. But you just need enough to give a soft touch to the top part of the wing. And I'm kind of pulling the paint off my brush as I go. I just need one more tiny dot. Just keep bringing up that bubble gum. Where did I put it? There it is right there. I just want enough to not really notice so much on these wings that it's really there, but just to introduce some of that same color to it that's in the toga, so they look like they belong together. They're part of the family, they're part of the gang. They all fit together, if you will. So just a little tiny bit more color. That's a little lighter. That's kind of what I want, like that. Just a little bit like that. Now, whenever you do like the edge of a piece of wood like this, it's always good to go over and do the sides of the wood the same color so that they look like they match. In fact, when you lay this toga onto your pig, and it comes time to put this toga on the pig, when you base painted your pig, the edge of the pig body was the peachy color. You want to make sure that you paint the sides of the wood from the toga all the way down to the bottom the same color. So just one little tip that I don't think I mentioned in my instructions per se. So, and maybe you already sense that, get your intuition to just do that, but I thought I should just mention that. You'll get a little bit better of a finished look when you're done if you always paint the sides to match the darkest color of your shading, regardless of what project you're working on. So this doesn't have to be super noticeable, but just enough to tone down some of that berry and pick up some of that pink. Okay, there we go. Okay, now moving on to our baby pink. Don't wash out your brush. Keep your brush, quote unquote, dirty. And the reason why I like to work with dirty brushes is that when you do that, you're mixing some of the two colors together and it makes them blend together more better. There's not really a word, more beautifully. So now we're working with baby pink. We're doing the same technique. Now our brush has a lot of paint in it, right? We've loaded it several times. So we are going to have to be pretty much more careful. Now, the first time I moved this over to pounce it out on my paper towel, there's not a whole lot of color difference because I still have a lot of bubblegum pink in here, but there is quite a difference in shade between the two. So I'm just going to take the first load and kind of work it all out, scrub it all out on my paper towel, and then I'm going to reload it again with baby pink. Do it really dry. Maybe I should have done that over here at first. We can tell that it's starting to get lighter now. And I'm going to start scrubbing again. I want to get this pretty dry. And now we're getting a softer look, and it's a little bit lighter. Now we're going to take this baby pink, and we're just going to dry brush over those stripes again to bring them up in value just a little. So it needs to be kind of quiet and kind of subtle, this lighter shade of pink. So just go ahead and work it down those stripes and get those stripes even brighter. Now they really kind of pop. When I look at it in the recording, which is kind of like looking at it from a distance from me, even though it's kind of right here in front of my face when I look at it in the recording, it's kind of the same as taking it for a walk or holding it away from you to get a better perspective. Okay, see how that looks smoother? And that I have not done this side and I have done this. Can you see the difference? It just really jumps out at you. And go ahead and do this upper area, which is a little bit thinner than the one below. I think I need a tiny touch more in there. I'm going to pounce all that out, swirl it all out, keep it really dry and very lightly, because this is the first time I'm just going to super light pressure go over this and bring the color up, brighten that up. So there we go, like that. Now you've got two fairly bright stripes that are going on here. So we're going to put a little bit of that on the top of our wings and brighten that up again slightly too, a little bit on the sides, not that much, it's not that important to go over here on the sides that much. And we're going to just get that color bright. Okay, so we've got some major stripes going on here, and they're very, very bright. And the area that we stippled over to begin with, down here in the middle, now that actually looks dark, but at one time, it didn't look that way, did it? Okay. All right, so we're going to go on and we're going to change colors now. We're going to go to Alizarin Crimson and Carousel Pink, which is a dark pink. And believe it or not, we're going to add a couple drops of True Red to it, which is not really something you'd think that would go well with these. But I want you to start by making an equal mix of Alizarin Crimson. So there you go with that. And put in about the same amount of Carousel Pink. So these are about the size of a nickel, I would guess, if they were out on a flat surface. And then I want you to just put 2 small drops of True Red. And I think I might need a slight bit more Carousel Pink, so let me just throw that in there first. Okay, just 2 drops of True Red. There's 1 and 2. Now what that's going to do is still keep us within the same color family, because we've still got some of this pink and this darker red going on. But the True Red will kind of perk it up a little bit, brighten it right up. And it actually will look really good on there with our other colors. And it gives it just a slight variance, but it will look really good. Okay. So we've still got our dirty brush. And that's good, because remember, when we use a dirty brush, we've got some of the other colors in it that's going to be mixed with the new colors. So we're going to just lightly load this new color that we mixed together onto our brush, and we're going to pounce out some of the color. Now this has still got some of those 2 pink shades in it, right? You can see the more that I work it out, the lighter the colors get. And that's what we want these to do. We want them to blend. Now I'm going to load it one more time in this color. And this is going to be a dry brush technique. So we want to get, oh, that's already pretty dry. Look at that. We want to get this soft look all the way around. That's still got too much pink in the edge of our toga. So I need a little bit more in here. I'm going to kind of work it on the edges so that I do get that paint a little more diversified into my brush. There we go. Now that's looking more red. And we're going to start pouncing this red color all the way around the outside of our toga. This has got more pink in it than what I was hoping for. We might have to start with a new brush. Probably not, if we just get it loaded a little more. There we go. There's some of our red starting to show through. So go ahead and pounce this color all the way around the edge of your toga. And we're going to later float over this and give it a little bit more definition. But for right now, we've got kind of this dark pink going. It's got some red in it because we used our brush that was kind of dirty. And I've loaded it again because I kind of want to keep it more on the red side than on the pink side. And as soon as I do that, I just very, very lightly, I'm tapping on it, not even pushing, because it's just got a ton of paint in it. So I'm just very, very, very lightly pouncing along the edge. Now we're going to be, as I said, floating along here, which will kind of define this color a little bit more and really help to set it in. Now you'll notice on the edges of your Cupig toga, there's some little V shapes. Those are going to be darkened with a very dark paint at the end, and they're kind of a negative space. So when you're stippling around the edge, make sure you go in around those little V's so that you can get the color. You don't cover up all the color with the dark negative space that will eventually be filled in towards the end of the project. Okay, this has got a ton of color on it, and we're just still going around. I haven't had to load it again now because now it's pretty much got a very nice mix of the reds that we mixed here, some of the pinks that were already in the brush, and it's starting to get a little softer. Okay, I'm going to, because I have so much paint in my brush here still, I'm going to go over to my wings, and right here along the sides of the wings, I'm going to get some of this darker color in. Now when you paint your wings, you don't have to worry about this part down here because that's not going to show. In fact, it just kind of looks like an odd shape because it comes in and then it bulges out. Well, all on this bulge, I left it that way so that you have a bigger surface to glue onto. This, the only part that's going to show beyond your Cupid is about that much. So you have about that much that's just for glue. So you don't have to worry about having that part look at the grape. Just a little FYI, but I do take my color down in there just in case. I want to be able to adjust my wing to any length that I want, and if I carry the paint down far enough, I won't run into any trouble without the color not showing. So we're going to float over this, like I said. Don't lose a lot of sleep if it doesn't look really pronounced right now. That will be defined when we start floating. Okay, now the center crease right here. It goes from this one over to this V over here. And as you can, we've done a lot of stippling. If you need to redraw that line, that crease line, go ahead and put that in. But I still haven't loaded my paint. So notice that it's really dry now because I've gone all the way around the edges. And I'm going to where the crease is here between those folds in the toga. And I first stippling that in, and it already looks darker from that. Now I'm just going to take my brush and dry rub it in because it's pretty dry by now. And I'm just going to get a little bit of a separation. Now that's going to be further defined by floating here in just 1 minute. So now you've got dark, light, dark, light, dark. And trust me, it's really going to be okay. If you want to make that dark area a little bit wider, it's okay as long as your brush is super, super soft. It's very forgiving. Dry brushing is really, really forgiving. If you've got a beginning painter who's struggling with floating, remember how hard it was when we first started? If you'll have them dry brush super, super softly underneath the area that they're going to float on and then float over it, they'll just be so delighted with themselves because they will be able to achieve that smooth transition. Okay, so go ahead and rinse this brush out now. We're going to move on with a different kind of brush, and we don't want all that color that's in there to dry inside of those bristles. So take a minute and scrub that out really well. And just kind of get some of that paint out and set that aside, lay that flat to dry for a little while. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we'll do some of our floats. I've been saying that, haven't I? And one thing that I like to do is use a sheer float. I want to demonstrate that for you. So I'm kind of moving all of my implements here into view of the camera so that you can see pretty well what I do. So I like to float with an angular brush. Some people are flat brush lovers. Whatever works the best for you. You know yourself and know what you've come to love, because I believe this class is pretty much filled with intermediate painters with some good experience. But for me, I like angulars. And I usually use anywhere from a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, although occasionally I'll go smaller or larger. In this case, I think this is a 5/8. So anyway, go ahead and let me pull my brush base in so you can see that's going to be important. Go ahead and get a regular float ready. Sorry, this paper towel's kind of bumpy. Just like you normally would. Get your brush in the water, come into your paint and side loading, and taking it to your palette. I use a wet palette, and doing your blend, which is a gradual transition of dark paint to light paint. Sometimes to make this even lighter, I will, let's see, can I see what can see? I will dip my paint back in. I did not swish it out. Pull it back over to my paper towel and allow some of the water to be pulled out. And then I'll go back in and I will begin to palette blend again. And what this does is gives me the same color, but makes it more sheer so that you can see some of the things that are going on underneath. This is going to be kind of important when we're going to be doing this reverse float right down here, down the center. So this is kind of a wiggly line where this is, so you don't need to worry about making this a super straight float. You aren't going to want to get this center. There's some wiggles right here in the toga. Get the center line in here, and this is where it separates between the two rows. Now, it's almost impossible, at least it always has been for me, to get a really perfect double reverse float on the first time. So I usually end up going back and stroking it over. So I'm going to double load this again like I did before. This has got a little more paint on it this time, which I think might look good. And I'm going back against it. And I'm going to float right along where I was at before and get some of that shading in there. And if you feel like you need to go flip it over the other way while it's still wet and meet that float, then please do so. And you want the color, darkest color in the center. and you want it diffusing out from the center. That's what we're after. You need to get more paint in your brush. Do so. I'm about the point where I need to. And here we go again. I like to double load it. And there we go. I'm going to quickly flip that over to the other side and meet it and try to get that to look like the color. I'll put my brush over a little bit. Meeting in the center and blending out. And it's a good thing that this wrinkle is not straight because it helps when we're trying to get that reverse float to look good. Okay, so there you have it. It looks pretty red right now, but by the time we get our other shading colors over it, it will actually look really good. It's amazing what those 2 drops of true red do to make a difference. Okay, so we've got that. It's a little bit wet there, so let's go around the outside edges of our toga. Try not to cross over where your wet floats are. And there's the advantage right there of having stippled underneath and dry brushed underneath your float. It just makes that float look really well blended and just ties it in really, really well. I'll probably go over that again to make it a little bit darker, but that's where we're at for the first time. Let's go around and do the other side right over here. Come back around this toga. Put some shading in there on the side. And I might, when this dries, go over and do it again just to get the color a little more intense. I always like things bright. It's just kind of my personality, kind of my painting personality, if you will. And there we go with that. Now set that aside, move that over for a minute. It's glaring in the light, you can see that it's still wet, but that's kind of what we're after right now. Stripes. We'll go back and do the ends here in just a minute. So while that's drying, let's go over to our wings. And you're going to want to get just a thin amount, not very much, just a skinny little amount on there. I might double dip it, sometimes I don't. And we're just going to float around this pink center of the heart right here. I'm just going to get a little of this shaded color going on right around here on both of our hearts. Now remember that it's not really so critical how it looks down here at the bottom of this heart, because that's going to be glued on and covered up. We'll let that dry. We'll do this other side and we'll come back and flip it over and go around the other way. Just a skinny little float will do. So this is not hard, it's just a little intricate, so we have to be a little patient and go slow. Okay, I can't see that a lot. I would probably darken that up with another application. In fact, I'm going to just add a little more paint to my brush right now. Okay, so we'll come back and do the other sides in just a minute. Let's go out and do the ends of our toga. That side's still wet. We'll start over here. So remember that I said that there were little negative spaces right here. If you look at the pictures of the toga, you can, let's see, right there we are. You can see what I mean right there and right there. So as we go to shade with this, with our dark shadings, we're going to remember that and we're going to shade accordingly. So on this side of the toga, that V shape is right there. right by the crease. So I'm going to pull my brush in and come up here to the top. And whenever I have a point or a V in anything, I'm going to fill it in. I don't like things that are just left as a square, like square edges. I like to kind of walk that color out. So I don't know if you can tell that yet very well. It's still kind of wet, but it comes down and around like that. Now on this side of the toga, on the smaller side, there are two of those V's. We've got one every time where the wood cuts in, bends in, that's where a V is. So take that into consideration when you're floating the sides of your wood there. Got a little too much water in my brush, sometimes that happens. Okay. So start here and you're going to accommodate that small V where that wrinkle starts. And you're going to come up here and you're going to accommodate that small V where you're going to paint that negative space and then taper on down to the bottom. Again, any place that comes to a point, I like to round that off. Okay, so this is looking good. I want to make this darker. I'm going to go over it one more time with another float, just exactly like I did before. And we'll get that darkened in just really fast because we have that stippling and dry brushing that was done beforehand. It really makes it easy to kind of get a goof-proof float, which is welcome in any world. I don't care how experienced of a painter you are. A goof-proof float always sounds like a good idea. Everybody's friend.
You used to call that the Titanic.
So there we go with that. And I'll do one more on the other side. And then we'll go finish up the little area around the heart and our wings. So it's kind of wet. Let me turn it so it doesn't play. So that's what we got. We've still got a lot of dark shading to go over this, and we got some of our pattern that we'll paint on. We're going to paint our pattern next, and then we're going to paint some dark shading over the pattern. And I explain that in another video, in the next video, why we do that. So let's go to our tiny heart wings. They're not super tiny, I guess. Tinier than our toga. And let's get some shading back on the other side. Now this is pretty subtle. It's kind of skinny. And it doesn't show really a lot, which is fine because the focus of our eyes are not really on the wings. But if they did not blend in color, they would stand out. So we want it to make sure that it looks like it's all part of the family, that it all goes together. So we'll make sure we treat this in the same way as we do the toga. I'll bring a little more color in here and around that one and over back to this one. Okay. All right, so just to quickly review, because this is the end of our video 2, the next steps will be picked up in the next segment of the videos. We've got our shading around the sides, and we've accommodated where our negative spaces are. We've got a reverse flow of our shading in the center, and we've done this darker color around the hearts of our wings. And that's it for this segment. And so if you'll start watching video through, you'll start to see where we start putting on all the plaid on the pattern of the wings. See you in a bit.